We're sitting here in London, in the United Kingdom, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. And over the last 20 years, they've driven up electricity prices so much, and heating fuel costs and energy sources of all kinds.
They haven't seen a raise in 20 years because whatever increase there is in their paycheck, it is immediately eaten up by the added costs to avoid the existential crisis.
My president is fighting back because we found large reserves of oil and gas in Senegal. And of course, everybody else is trying to tell us not to tap into it. But of course, we're going to tap into it.
So it is a very hypocritical standpoint. You know, we in the West will stay energy rich and prosperous, but we're not going to allow you in the developing world to burn coal, nor will they fund hydrocarbon projects in general.
We're sitting here in London, in the United Kingdom, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. And over the last 20 years, they've driven up electricity prices so much, and heating fuel costs and energy sources of all kind, that they've actually had an unusual phenomenon for a wealthy country. They've had a roughly 30% decline in their total energy consumption as a nation. They're proud of the 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. They never mention that the majority of it is just reduced energy consumption. And reduced energy consumption from two sources. One is energy-intensive manufacturing just left. It's not made at a natural gas-powered factory in the UK anymore. It's a coal-powered plant in Asia and then loaded on a diesel-powered tanker ship and brought back. So that's not really greenhouse gas reduction, right? That's just exporting your emissions, and then they are the largest importer of greenhouse gas emissions through the manufactured products coming back into the UK. The other piece of that is impoverishment. If you make energy prices more expensive, lower income people, they don't heat their homes as warm. They don't keep their houses at safe temperature. We saw significant rise in excess deaths last winter because heating prices were so high. So look, the societal toll of this is large. What's the case for this to reverse? Britain is a wealthy, developed country. Do people get to a point where they say that's enough, where they connect the dots? Is there a case from optimism here, or is the Germanys and United Kingdoms just going to continue to deindustrialize to the end?
One of the first things I did when I flew to London in my hotel was to put Classic FM on because I like that radio. I was a student in Britain. I used to listen to it all the time. And what immediately struck me that every advertisement, every pause between music was filled with some sort of appeals for people to save energy, for people how they should heat their homes. Basically, as far as I can tell, there is a massive propaganda war going on in the United Kingdom and in other Western democracies where some people with financial interests, some people who are just simply interested, and of course the government is pushing this apocalyptic existential crisis down people's throats so that they are willing to put up with the reduction in their standards of living. Another little vignette from my time in the United Kingdom. When I was a student here up in Scotland, I was a night shift gas station attendant. And I remember back then, I think a liter of petrol, they call it petrol here, we call it gas, it was £1. Now it's about £1.50. But if you filled your car with 10 pounds of petrol, 8 pounds of that was tax that went straight to the government. And it is a fact that living has become very expensive in certain ways, meaning if your economy grows at 1% a year or 1.5% a year, in Europe they grow at a lower rate than the United States, so let's say 1% a year, and maybe your salary appreciate in real terms by 1% a year, so maybe every year you're becoming 1% better off. But the energy consumption, the energy taxes that allow you to heat your home or cool your home, or the energy taxes that go into the production of food, eat it all up, you actually end up being poorer. I have no doubt that Europeans are in many ways, or rather they feel much poorer. They haven't seen a raise in 20 years because whatever increase there is in their paycheck, it is immediately eaten up by the added costs of to avoid the existential crisis. Do I believe that there is hope? Of course, I believe there is hope. But the only way we can do it is by penetrating, by destroying this massive propaganda machine that keeps on worrying people to death. And that's what we are doing at ARC.
So, Magatte, we're talking about in countries that have been captured by an ideology or whatever, particularly in Europe, have continued to elevate energy prices, actually shrink what they make here, I think lower the standard of living of lower income people. But if we look in the developing world, I think of India or Indonesia or Vietnam, their energy consumption's growing rapidly, their standard of living's rising, actually an incredibly positive trend. Yeah. Maybe even reinforced a little bit by their energy cost advantages, drawing more manufacturing there that's being exported out of Europe. Is there a case for optimism? What's going to drive the progress in Africa, for example, your own country of Senegal, or European countries or policies and Western policies going to be able to strangle that? Or is Africa and Senegal going to move forward in its own way and avoid some of the lunacy we're talking about?
Yeah, no. So for me, the reason why I'm very optimistic, at least for Africa and the rest of the global South, even though, yes, we have our problems, is because we definitely are not buying into the nonsense of the West. We really are not. And maybe I like to tell people, on us, the signal is not lost in the noise. I think in the West, there's so much noise. There's too much noise. All of this it's noise. All of these people playing around. But us, the reality, and I think some of you called it realism, climate realism or something. I think we're very much in the thick of it. When you're well below your 4,000 kilowatt per hour, consumption, it's right there in your face. So we don't have a luxury of the nonsense that you guys have just subjected yourselves to. We just don't have it. And so it's saving us right now, honestly. We're looking at the West and I kid you not, we are thinking, what is it that they're smoking over there? What is it? And our youth has no patience for any of this nonsense, including the identity culture wars. We don't have patience for any of that. Again, the reality keeps us grounded because we've got bigger problems than any of that stuff. And so the signal is not lost in the noise for us. So that's the reason why I'm super, optimistic about it. But where I want to tell the West so our people are going to fight. My president is fighting back because we found large reserves of oil and gas in Senegal. And of course, everybody else is trying to tell us not to tap into it. But of course, we're going to tap into it. And if they're going to try to tell us, if they're going to try to force our hand by closing their bank accounts, which, by the way, with ESG, that was another nasty marriage, right? Some financing corporations could not finance fossil fuel-related projects and infrastructures because ESG, supposedly. So if the West wants to play that nasty game with us, we're going to turn over to China. And does the West really want that? Because if you think we're going to sit there and wait for death, you are blinding yourself. So this is what's going to happen. But either way, we're going to get it. And once again, I will tell the West, how much more suicidal are you going to be? You're doing that to yourself, and meanwhile, basically pushing an entire continent on the hands of China, which supposedly is by now, I think everybody's talking about how the CCP, and let's be clear, we're talking about the CCP, not the Chinese people, not per se. So there, to me, that's what I'm seeing. So bottom line is, we are not going to sit there and just wait for death. We're going to do something, and it's going to be up to the West to take a lesson from us and or say, hey, we're going to turn around. So I don't know, but
right. But I want to make one more point. I think that if the extreme environmentalists are going to succeed, they can only succeed if these environmental measures happen gradually in slow increments, like a frog being killed by turning up the temperature in water. By the time it realizes what's happening, it's already half dead, right? So you want to boil the frog very slowly. So the only way they can succeed, if this goes on for decades, these slow incremental turns of the screw, when you have a sudden energy crisis, which is what happened after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, things go out of whack very, very quickly. I genuinely believe that with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it actually helped many people change their attitudes to nuclear.
Yeah,
in the last 2 years, we have seen a massive shift in terms of the acceptability of nuclear power. That was obviously not something that anybody expected to happen. But once gas prices just suddenly went to $200-$300 per metric ton, suddenly people realized, oh my God, we need a different source of energy. So
you're getting your realism as well. So those crises help people.
Those crises do help. Yeah. And I don't think that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is the last crisis that they are going to encounter. Maybe you'll have an extra cold winter, maybe some other international conflict. And before you know it, we are back to seeing those prices of oil and gas suddenly spiking. And that's completely unsustainable. And it exposes the governing elites in Britain and in the United States to charges that you are not really looking after us at all, because we are dying here because we cannot heat our homes. Yeah.
So I'm going to follow that theme, Marian, with Robert here. So you said the West doesn't want Senegal to develop their oil and gas resources. So Robert, help us understand, why does a Western government think that's a positive climate policy? Like if there's energy technologies that are better, it doesn't matter the supply of oil and gas, we're just going to go to something better. But if you produce less, you're going to push the prices up. Maybe that makes it so people you could raise energy prices and that'll reduce consumption of it. But yet our president of the United States has been going around to Venezuela and Saudi Arabia asking for more oil because he doesn't want high gas prices. Right. How do we square these things?
How much time do we have for this?
In the Robert Bryce fashion. We have some time there, Robert. This is a big question.
Well, it is. And I want to come back to, so Marian, you're a native of Poland, am I right?
Slovakia, yes.
So Slovakia, because I want to come back to that because I think you made a really important point about there are certain countries in Europe that are going to embrace nuclear more quickly, and Poland being one of them. Romania has already made big moves to adopt nuclear in the wake of this invasion.
Yes.
Seeing a big turnaround here in Britain and France, I think. So I'm interested, I might create a betting pool on which country is going to be the first one that deploys new nuclear, because I think this is a really key indicator of what you just talked about. So, but as far as the politics of this, it's really important to think about, okay, well, how does this play, right? Because the last thing an incumbent president or a sitting president wants is high gasoline prices. And why is that? Well, consumers in general, and I know this, and you ask people, how much do you pay for electricity? They have no idea on a per unit basis, right? They don't understand what the kilowatt hour is. Most people, the vast majority, and I know this, I'm talking to energy audiences, they don't know the difference between energy and power. They don't know their own business very well. So they don't really know how to read their electricity bill. They only know if it's going up or down, but they don't know what the unit cost per kilowatt hour that they're paying. But they will tell you to the penny how much they paid gasoline the last time they filled up. So that to them is an indicator of their wealth or relative poverty is the price of gasoline, because they sit there for a full 2 or 3 minutes staring at that price, and the price is on the thing. You don't go to the grocery store and see the price of milk is $5.49 today, but at the gas station you see it's $3.50 a gallon. It's $3.49 9/10, right?
But even that, and this is a thing, even those last two decimals, people look at them.
Yeah.
Because they have, right? It's right. 359, not 349.
Well, 349.9. Right, yeah, right. So from a political standpoint, it's very well understood, right? That's why carbon taxes will never work, right? Because they're going to tell, no politicians are going to get in the Senate there and say, I want to make your energy more expensive, because people sit there and they go, this is a bad idea. I don't like that, right? Because it's going to make their cost of living higher. So there's this bifurcation and this duality in the political system, right? Where Biden goes to Maduro, the narco, right? Who succeeded the Chavista, who was a narco, right? Who devastated Venezuela with that in hand. Oh, we're not going to call you a narco anymore. Start producing more oil, so maybe we can bring gasoline prices down, because they know from a political standpoint, if high gasoline prices are bad for them, right? Yes. And President Macron in France learned this very well after the Yellow Vest movement, right? And Trudeau learned it very well in Canada after what was the equivalent of the Yellow Vest movement there, right? oh, you're going to raise our energy prices? Well, we don't like this, and we will gladly bring or the Dutch Schwabbers, bring our tractors into the center of town to show you how much we don't like it. But at the same time, they will adhere to these policies with the World Bank, Export-Import Bank, other multilateral, bilateral lending institutions. Well, we're not going to lend any money to those, we're going to let the dark people stay in the dark.
Yep.
Right? We're not going to lend to those people because climate change, right? So it is a very hypocritical standpoint. It is a immoral approach. We in the West will stay energy rich and prosperous, but we're not going to allow you in the developing world to burn coal. And so now the World Bank has declared they will not fund any more coal-fired power plants. This has been the last one they financed was 4 or 5 years ago, and nor will they fund hydrocarbon projects in general. So I think this opens the door for China. It opens the door for other lenders, maybe the Japanese.
That's right.
The Russians, I don't know. The Russians are still lending for nuclear, and Rosatom is one of the most successful deployers of nuclear power all around the world.
As a matter of fact, Burkina Faso is in talking with Russia for a nuclear plant.
And I'm like, we'll go to coal and then we'll come back to nuclear. But Robert, I think I read in your paper just recently, coal's been 35 to 38% of global electricity for like 40 years.
Yeah.
So stopping lending today sounds like, well, it's almost gone. We'll let it peter out. It's still by far the world's largest source of electricity, certainly the main source in the developing countries of additional electricity.
Yeah.
But yet the World Bank, we're standing against that today.
Right. So, I mean, these Western countries, and Britain was one of them, wearing their, getting tennis elbow, patting themselves on the back. We are closing our coal plants. Aren't we virtuous? Look at what is happening in China. Last year, Global Energy Monitor reported China permitted 2 new coal-fired power plants per week. That's 100 gigawatts of new coal-fired capacity. This is what I call the iron law of electricity. People, countries, and businesses will do whatever they have to do to get the electricity they need. They will steal electricity. I saw that in India. They will pay the generator mafia. I saw that in Beirut. They will get small generators and go to the gasoline station and after hurricanes because they want mom to have a refrigerator and air conditioning at night. Right? They will do whatever they have to do, including burning coal. This is no surprise. So if this idea, it's just China and India. Well, a lot of it is China and India. There's no doubt about it. The coal consumption in Asia Pacific, look at the statistics, is soaring, falling in the West, falling in North America, falling in Europe. Okay, so what? That's compared to these massive increases in Asia, it's meaningless. And yet there's this self-congratulatory effort. And Michael Bloomberg, I don't know if I mentioned him, I mentioned the $500 million gift to Beyond Carbon. Their goal is to close every last coal plant in America. Every one of them. They say that as their stated goal. So, this is this kind of virtue signaling from one of the richest people in the world. Oh, he's going to help us save the climate. Well, that's not going to be the case in Indonesia, Vietnam, China, India, or many of the other dozen or so countries that have announced or built new coal plants or commissioned new coal plants last year.
I would suspect all of us are pro-nuclear, but if we look at the pace of that, it's probably not going to be the main source of new electricity in Africa, or am I wrong? Could it be that?
I mean, actually, it could be. Bjorn is not here with us today, Bjorn Peters, but definitely for this new product that they're building, an African nation is going to be, it seems like, their first customer. And so, no. I think you might be very surprised. And Robert, it would be good to look at I didn't know you were having these bets, going on. But we might actually come out of nowhere and surprise you, because we're also looking at mini reactors, small. Yeah, we're looking at those as well. We're looking at those as well. And us with the startup cities that we're building, definitely energy is a big question. So definitely, the mini reactors have been part of a mix that we're going to try to put in these cities. So I think you might be very surprised as to how things evolve over the next decade or so. Yeah.
And let's not forget that South Africa does actually have a nuclear.
They do. I think that's the only country that only country that has it. That has a nuclear. Yeah.
In Slovakia, what's the feeling of the people there? The public opinion on energy? Are they pro nuclear, pro coal? Are they pro green policies? Where's the
Well, they've just switched on a new reactor this year. I think it's their fourth, and they're very proud of that. They are now an electricity exporter precisely because they have nuclear. But because I'm a native speaker, I've been observing that over the last few years, the kind of environmental concerns that we have in the West have been slowly spreading in Eastern Europe as well, especially amongst the young.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's not
and I think it's partly because these countries are small and they have languages that nobody else understands. They read a lot of news stories in the West.
Yeah.
They translate them because they think it's important, and they present it to the young. So actually, we do have an increase in the popularity and electoral presence of green parties. And if they're not necessarily called green, then parties which have a great green tint to them, because parties in pursuit of power wish to cater to the median voter and to the young voter.
Yeah.
And the young voter is becoming more and more environmentally conscious. Now, the thing is that Eastern Europe has made a tremendous amount of progress on environmental quality when it shut down communism. When communism disappeared, which was insanely energy wasteful, because there was no really price mechanism to show you what made sense and what didn't. The rivers got cleaned up, the air got cleaned up, tree coverage began again. But my point is that none of these countries are really at an economic stage where they can afford the kind of environmental policies that we have in the West. And what worries me is that the poor parts of Europe will be hit with similar policies, especially if they are imposed on them by the European Union. Because the European Union has to create policies for the entire Union. Now, the difference, I've looked at this maybe 10 years ago, but the difference between the richest country in Europe, which was at that point was Luxembourg, and the poorest, which was Romania, is 14-1. To put that in American context, the difference between the richest American state, which again 10 years ago was North Dakota, and the poorest was Mississippi, is 2-1. Mm-hmm. Now imagine imposing policies, environmental policies, draconian environmental policies, on a continent where you have 14-1 difference.
Yeah.
The Luxembourg people might just about cope with it. But the people in Romania and Bulgaria, they're going to get hammered.
So let me, if I may, just jump in real quickly, because, well, 2 quick points. And I think it's really important about this disparity, right? The massive disparity between Luxembourg and
Romania.
Romania, Bulgaria.
Here's a quick data point. I'm a longtime critic of electric vehicles. So, my view, they're the next big thing, and they always will be, right? They've been in the market for 100 years. Oh, they have 6% of all sales. Okay, great. But, there aren't that many people who want that car, right? Okay, so California has 29 times, here's the number, 29 times more electric vehicles per capita than Mississippi. You mentioned Mississippi. Well, why is that? Well, part of its mandates, right? And part of its fashion, part of its California, but 29x, right? Now, that's just one indicator, right? But when you talked about that disparity, I think it's important to remember we're talking about all these different ideas about climatism and about adoption of technology, adoption of mandates. It's all going to be very geographically defined, right? So, what will work in Luxembourg or be acceptable there is going to be far different than what's going to be acceptable in Romania. We see the same in the United States, where you have bans on natural gas will likely be one state. New natural gas hookups will likely be banned in the state of California very soon. They're already banned in 76 municipalities or counties in California. But you have other states like Texas saying, you cannot, we have a ban on bans, right? A number of states have bans on natural gas. So there's going to be a lot of regional variation in this climatism and the reaction to the climatism, right? There's going to be a lot of backlash. And you mentioned about hope and, what are the things that are hopeful? I think the political leaders in Europe are starting to get the message. And we talked about the yellow vest movement. I didn't mention it earlier. Remember, it's just a few weeks ago, Rishi Sunak backpedaled. I mean, there's some of these politicians are backpedaling as fast as they can because, they're looking at this net zero policy, and Rishi Sunak said effectively, yeah, we're not going to do that now. were realistic and pragmatic. Those were the words he used, right? And what happened in the immediate week afterwards, his poll numbers went up 4%.
So when do you guys see the clash, the how do you call it, the clash back happening when the politicians, because they have to pay attention, because at some point realism is going to hit in the form of votes. When do you think it's going to start to clash with this other industry we talked about? That's in it for the money. And what's going to happen?
I think it's already started in Europe. I don't think it's started so much in the U.S. yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the Democratic Party, I think Biden is clearly looking over his shoulder, and they're looking at what's happening in Europe and saying, the Davos crowd, our friends at the club, at the country club, they're okay with this, but the people, the mass majority of particularly working class people, they're not. And so I think that's going to be a source in the U.S. source of strength for the Republicans, right? If they ever get there. I mean, they're so disorganized, right? But as a voting bloc, they're appealing to the working class and the poor and saying what these elites on the Democratic side are pushing. And I think it's a very fair diagnosis. They're pushing regressive energy policies. And in my view, I'll end with this. All of this decarbonization effort, it's all regressive. All hurts the poor and middle class. All of it.
Yeah.
So we started the dialogue today by, I think, pretty violently and quickly agreeing that energy equals prosperity. More energy equals people better standard lives and more opportunities. So now you got to pull out your crystal balls and tell me what's going to happen. Clearly, people in the developing world, and they are at current rates, growing energy production at a pretty good clip in most of those countries. And do these trends continue? We're talking about some wealthy countries that have actually gone the wrong direction. What's the big change in the next 30 years? Do we continue to grow global energy at similar rates today? Do we grow it faster because the political backlash turns back this sort of anti-energy clock? Or does that anti-energy climatism spread even wider, and therefore the growth of global energy consumption and production slows dramatically?
I think that I think that so long as there is interjurisdictional competition in the world,
Yes.
The energy consumption will rise, at least in some places, maybe in all places, as countries learn from other people's mistakes, such as what's happening in Germany right now, that they switched off their nuclear power stations and now burning coal. They are a laughing stock for the rest of the world, and everybody knows that what's happening in Germany is completely irrational. So we need to maintain interjurisdictional competition so that different countries can try to go in different ways, and we will then see who is the fool, like the Germans right now, and who is smart, like the Swedes and the French, who derive 75% of their electricity from nuclear. And that it brings me back to this difference between the Davos and the anti-Davos. Davos, one of the reasons why they want global governance is precisely so that there is less competition. We are in favor of more competition and from learning, because it is only through competition that you learn. I am a huge proponent of globalization. I believe that globalization has been a tremendous good for the world. I'm an opponent of globalism in a sense that I don't believe in global governance. Davos wants to govern us globally. I want as much competition and for countries to go in different directions and try out different things. And some of them will fail and some of them will succeed. And hopefully we will learn from the ones who succeed.
And that's exactly why I'm startup cities all the way. Let 1,000 nations bloom and let everybody try different things. And we learn, all of us collectively learning from that. And like you said, globalization, free movement of people, goods and services, as well as ideas, all for it. But beyond that, I don't want to be trapped to anything or to anyone.
These free cities you're envisioning, and I love that movement, by the way, is the belief that they're going to be able to control their own energy system. You're not at the mercy of the country you're in. They're going to produce your own energy in the free cities.
Yep.
Fantastic.
I think 10 years. I think over the next 10 years, I'm long-term bullish to the United States. I'm absolutely a homer, in that regard. The U.S. has still incredible advantages over the rest of the world in terms of geography, in terms of demographics, workforce. 17 of the top 25 universities in the world, 40 of the top, 7 of the top 10, 17 of the top 25, 40 of the top 100 are in the United States. we have the rule of law. We have abundant natural resources, super abundant. So absolutely bullish on the United States, despite the myriad difficulties that are in the near term. Bearish on Europe. I think Europe is facing enormous problems, both on the energy side, demographic side, on the immigration side. They have bad governance, just like the U.S., but they're also wrestling with the EU Commission and the European Commission. Who's going to be in charge? I just see it as an absolute mess in terms of how they come out of this, particularly on the energy side of it, when they've hitched themselves to Russian gas, and now that's going away, and they're going to have to buy natural gas that is now selling in the global market at 5 times the price of gas in the U.S. Like Henry Hub's about $3, TTF's at $15.
But the global South and the rest of the world.
I think that those countries, if they're going to look out for themselves, and I'm long-term bullish on India because I think that they have it's a dynamic, educated economy, and they're going to do what they need to do regardless of what the U.S. says. And so I think India has a lot of promise. China, I can't predict. Russia's in a world of hurt, regardless of what happens in Ukraine, from the demographics and so on. So, but it all comes back to these, where you started it. It's going to be the story of energy. Who can have cheap, abundant, reliable, energy resilient systems? That's going to determine the prosperity for the next 10 years, the next 20 years, the next 30 years, the next 50 years. That's going to be the key.
We all ended also with a common theme here, that competition, different cities, different countries, different states doing different things is what's required for innovation and progress. And eventually you think that the laggards follow on with the leaders. I've always said that in the United States. Thank God we have California.
Learn from them. Mistakes.
Yeah, just a state with an abundance of riches and opportunity, the promised land, and they've been able to engineer the highest adjusted poverty rate in the nation.
Yeah,
and they've continued to stumble on energy and therefore export jobs and lower qualities of living. I'm hoping more and more people are watching that. Unfortunately, my home state of Colorado is trying to go the direction of California, so maybe things aren't bad enough there yet to see it. But I think this competition of I spoke in Nebraska recently, second most reliable electricity grid in the country and somewhere around the 5th least expensive electricity. So what's happening? A flood of businesses and new demand inside Nebraska. They're growing their grid with a diversity of sources. Success tends to snowball and failure tends to snowball too, except in politics where failure can continue for a long time. Thank you so much, Marian, Magatte, Robert, and everyone who organized the ARC Forum. What a great 3 days we've had, and what an enlightening dialogue with all of you today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you, Chris.